We are the Childhood Collective, and we have helped thousands of overwhelmed parents find joy and confidence in raising their child with ADHD. I'm Katie, a speech language pathologist.
And I'm Lori.
And I'm Mallory, and we're both child psychologists. We combine the science of ADHD with the compassion of moms and bring you practical tools you can start using today.
So hit subscribe and let's help your family shine with ADHD.
A few months ago, we asked our social media followers about how their child with ADHD does with making friends and managing social situations. And we were shocked because over 90% of our followers who responded reported that their child with ADHD struggles in some or all social situations. And parents shared a lot of different challenges, a lot of them centered around ADHD and friendship. And almost all of these were related to the executive functions, which we talk about the executive functions a lot. But the executive functions include things like inhibition, so being able to stop myself when I'm not supposed to grab a toy from a friend who's playing with it, things like self-monitoring, so being aware of where we're at within the group and how I'm talking, how loudly or how fast I'm talking, those kinds of things. And then cognitive flexibility, so being able to be flexible, like when your friends play a game and it's a little bit different than the way you learned it at your house.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because we went through hundreds of responses and we identified some themes that kept coming up for you parents. So many of the concerns revolved around impulsivity. So we know that's a symptom of ADHD. So that might be rough play with other kids. It might be yelling near other kids. For younger kids, using potty talk a lot, or for older kids, swearing. Or running away from peers. Another thing that kept coming up is, getting or staying on topic during a conversation, either because they're distracted internally with thoughts that are interesting to them or with external distractions. So maybe, they're telling you about their day and the doorbell rings and they just get cut off and they are on to the next thing. So that was definitely a concern. Allowing the other person to have enough time to talk. So again, being able to wait if they're really excited and wanting to talk, and let that other child have a turn. Another thing, getting into other kids' personal space. So a lot of times just being very touchy or huggy when other kids maybe don't necessarily like that, or just talking too closely and having those kind of physical boundaries with them, or difficulty with flexible thinking. So what I mean by that is taking on the perspective of another person and how they might think or feel in a situation, holding grudges against a person, or just being really controlling in play. So they only want to play the thing that they're interested in, but they're not necessarily thinking about, okay, it's this, my friend's turn to decide on what game we're going to play this time.
Yeah, and I think that impulsivity one you mentioned, Lori, is really challenging for the child too, because a lot of times it's the acting before thinking sequence where they impulsively act, and then almost instantaneously they have the self-reflection of like, that's not what I wanted to do. Like that wasn't the best choice. And now that I have like an extra second to think about it, I'm sad that I did that. I wish I didn't do that. And I think so it's really hard to see your child even, and they can kind of take that self-reflection, which is a good skill, but it's hard to see them act impulsively and then immediately like that panic rushes over their face. Like, I can't believe I just did that, once they have a second to think. It's really hard for them.
And we've all been there when we, even as adults, say things and we're like, oh, shoot, why did I say that?
Why did I say that? Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah. So if you've watched your child experience any of these challenges, you and your child are not alone. This is really common among parents that have kids with ADHD, and parents are constantly asking us, how do I support my child? They want friends. How do I help them make friends and keep friends? And this is a really important question, and it's something that we all want for our kids, right? Especially kids with ADHD. Most of them they're very social and they long for these friendships, and they really want these social interactions to go well, but they're struggling. So That's why we're here today, right, friends?
Yep. Yep.
We want to share our 5 favorite tips for setting your child up for success when it comes to making friends.
Yes. And the first piece of this is to really make sure that we're creating realistic expectations. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the list that we just talked about, a lot of the things that Lori just described, those are things that a lot of kids actually struggle with, especially at a young age. And so all kids are learning how to create friendships. And then another really important piece is maintaining those friendships. So I know that some kids, it's a lot easier for them to actually make friends. They make friends really quickly, but then keeping friendship over time takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of negotiation and, like Lori said, perspective taking. And so this is something that all kids are working on. This is a process, and it's a skill and a whole set of skills that all kids are growing. And so as parents, when we think about, well, what can I expect? What should I be expecting? We want to take into consideration that for kids with ADHD, they have lagging social executive function skills, right? And again, we bring this up all the time because executive functions really are at the core of a lot of the needs for kids with ADHD. So when we think about some of these lagging skills, they are developing. They really are, but they're developing more slowly, maybe not in the exact way or at the exact pace that we might expect. And so, step number one is just really creating realistic expectations and keeping in mind that kids with ADHD are going to need a lot of practice. And that is on us as their parents to provide a lot of consistency and a lot of opportunities to practice the skills that we want them to eventually learn.
Yeah, and I think having those realistic expectations is so important, but it's really challenging when you're bringing your kid to the party and all the other kids are seemingly like holding it together well, right? They're
Yes.
following the directions, they're sitting and they're singing for cake.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have that like direct comparison in the moment of like, wow, my child's really struggling in this situation.
Yes.
So kind of bringing it back to what is realistic for my child based on how their brain is growing and developing can kind of help, because it is hard to see your child struggle.
It is. And we talk a lot too about strengths and focusing on our kids' strengths. And so I really encourage families. I have families all the time that will say, like, oh gosh, I just really want him to be in this competitive swim league that everybody else in our club is into, and so I think when you're seeing that and you're like, oh my gosh, my child is really struggling at that birthday party, taking a minute to realize that every kid at that birthday party has things they're really good at
Yep.
and things that they struggle with. And I think that's so not obvious to us.
Yes.
But as parents, keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
that brings us to kind of point number 2 is to really think about how can we lean into your child's strengths and their interests when we're trying to develop those friendships. So if you're thinking about we want to do a play date, for instance, and maybe your child is like really into trains. We have this awesome train park in Scottsdale where we live. So that might be a great opportunity for your child. They're really interested in that and sharing their love of that with another friend. It's something that they're very motivated for, and they're going to be happy during that time, right?
Hmm.
Or if you're looking into, again, what are kind of the sports that my child does well with? Maybe you find that in soccer, that just brings out a lot of negative emotions right now. We have some kids that just have they are not at the point where they can be on a team, and they're still working on those like executive functioning skills to make that a happy and successful experience. But maybe you start with something that's more individualized, like golf or something like that, where they can still be around other kids, but they're not as competitive and there's not as much of the teamwork to start with something like that. If you
Hmm.
think about, again, imagine yourself in a situation where you aren't successful and you don't understand it and you're going on a play date. Let's say, your friend invites you to go scootering and you've never scootered before, and they're going to bring one for you, but you've never done that before. And you're going to a skate park and they're really skilled at that, but you're trying to figure it out. And your child has big emotions. It's not necessarily going to be a good situation for them. in the sense that, if they make a mistake or whatever, they're getting frustrated frequently. That's going to cause a lot of big emotions on that play date. And maybe that's not the best place to start. So just really thinking about, what are my child's strengths? What are the things that they're interested in that could make those play dates or even those sports or things like that more successful for them?
I even think about for myself, like if I am going somewhere
Yes.
and I have to perform and do something that I'm not good at, I'm really focused on that, right? I'm thinking like my husband loves golf. He works in the golf industry. He loves to go to the driving range on a date. And I'm over here like, I do not really know how to use these clubs. And then all of a sudden, one of his coworkers comes over and starts talking to us. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm kind of sweating. I don't really know how to use these golf clubs. And now I'm talking and we're socializing. This is so many different tasks, so many executive functions, right? So
Yeah.
when we think about our kids, the same can definitely apply. Like, let's set them up for success. Let's take them somewhere where they
Yeah.
are already have those natural skills. And I do know as parents that can be really hard because
Yeah.
we all have ideas of what we want our
Yeah.
kids to be good at. But yeah, I think so. Our second point here is just leaning into the things that your child is naturally good at. And that might be a little bit hard to find. So take the time to figure that out and try different things. Don't be afraid to try something totally different if that's what they're expressing that they want to try.
Absolutely. And I think that leads nicely into our third point when we think about how do we set our kids up for success. And one way to do that is starting small. Start with one-on-one play dates. Large groups, even small group activities can be really overwhelming for kids with ADHD. Again, coming back to the situation where maybe they're expected to socialize while also learning a new skill like scootering. That's a huge cognitive load. Not only are they trying to learn the new skill, manage this new situation, a lot going on around them, but they're also trying to be social, make friends, try not to, steal the toy out of their friend's hands. So starting smaller, starting in a one-on-one situation rather than trying to do like small group or large group play dates can support your child and help them really focus on the executive function skills that you're trying to grow. Sometimes parents then say like, where do I even start? Like, how do I find that friend for my kid even, who would be a good match for my child for this one-on-one play date? And I think a great place to start is by asking your child's teacher, who does my child gravitate towards during the school day? Who do they seem to get along with? Who are they playing with at recess? And then figuring out a way, hopefully, that you can connect with that parent, whether there's your school has like some kind of forum where you can connect with other parents. I know my school does. So asking the teacher for some thoughts on who your child connects with well, or connecting with other families who are in the same activities as your kids. So let's say your child is doing soccer. Is there a particular child at soccer who seems to think the same way as your child, have the same interests, trying to set up those one-on-one play dates with them. So, and again, coming back to like building on your child's strengths and interests, then once you've like found that friend, you want to do that one-on-one play date, choose an activity that your child likes um, to set them up for success again.
Definitely. And I think keeping the play date really kind of short. So I know for me and my family, I have a really big family and we love to get together for like all day get-togethers, right? Like we bring food and we'll kind of go from like lunch to an afternoon activity to dinner. And the thing is that can be completely overwhelming for kids and especially kids with ADHD. So really setting the expectation like if things are going well after an hour and a half, it's okay to stop there. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
wait until everything has fallen apart to
Yep.
then be like, all right, we're leaving, right? So try
Yep.
to end on
Yep.
that high note. And that can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful to plan ahead a little bit too. And even communicating with the other parent and saying, hey, you know what? My phrase that I use, if you want to steal this, you can, is I say my kids turn into pumpkins. So if someone is hosting a party that goes past maybe like 7:30, 8 o'clock, I will literally say, because I am don't want to be socially awkward, but I can totally be awkward sometimes. And I'll say, you know what? I just want to let you know my kids turn into pumpkins at 7:30, so we're going to be taking off. And please use it. It's great. Everyone laughs. They think it's so funny. And the thing is, like, it's okay to stand up and say that. It took me a long time to figure out how to say it, but just keeping the expectation reasonable. So if things are going
I know
well, yeah.
I totally value my kids' sleep, and we will go places. And yeah, it's like, I know my kids are going to get really overly active. They get super emotional. Like if they're staying up past their bedtime, it's just not something to me that's worthwhile, and it never ends well.
You know, it's so funny because Lori and I actually shared a nanny when our oldest girls were babies.
Yes.
And that is like, honestly, I think I've told so many people about nanny sharing and they're like, how do you even do that? Right? Because you have so many different like ideas about sleep and how do you share a
It's
nanny?
very hard.
Yes. But the reason I think, honestly, the reason that it worked is because we were both like, we took sleep so seriously. Like
Yes,
we were
we
like
did.
the nap schedule and the nanny was great, by the way. We called her Mary Poppins. She knew exactly what
Yes.
to do. But it's true, like prioritizing sleep might be the thing for your kid. Maybe your kid it does better with not a lot of sleep. That would be really really very exceptional. But maybe it's more about food and making sure they have the right food at the party that your kid, that is, let's say they have a special diet or something, making sure that all of that is taken care of, because being able to accommodate and know like this is what is going to set us up for success is just really important. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
yes,
think know when to leave. Leave when the leaving's good, right?
Yeah.
exactly.
My husband loves Seinfeld, and there's like a scene where George Costanza is like, "Good night, everybody," when he's like leaving on a high note, and he always uses that.
I like it. So, point number 3, if you missed it, because there was a lot of ideas in there, is that we really want to make sure that we start small. Start with one-on-one play dates, set a schedule, know when it's going to end, and set your kid up for success in that way. So another kind of this goes along with it too, but another idea is to help your child to make a future picture. And what do I mean by that? I mean that kids with ADHD, because of the way that their brains work, because of something that they struggle with called nonverbal working memory, which we can talk about another day, but because of these differences, they tend to really live in the moment. So
Mhm.
they, in other words, are not thinking about the end of the play date. They're not thinking about what's going to happen next. They're thinking about what's happening right now. And that is a lot of fun in a lot of situations. So we don't, that's great. But as their helper, as their support, we can help them to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And really knowing our kids and knowing the situations that are potentially going to cause a problem, then we can start to help them basically practice and rehearse that thing that's coming up. So I will use a personal example. My kids love birthday cake, like love birthday cake. Like you would think that my kids have actually never had a birthday cake based on the deep passion that they feel for birthday cake. So every time we go to a birthday party, here comes the mom or maybe the dad with this giant, beautiful cake. And my kids are like I can just see the wheels turning. Like all they want to do is just like stick their finger in the cake or grab a piece of cake or the cupcake or be like, I want the one with the red balloon. And it gives
Yeah.
me so much anxiety. I'm not going to lie. It's like a trigger for me personally to be like, do not touch Madison's birthday cake before she has blown out the candles. So I practice this with my kids. Like we talk about it and I'm like, hey, what do you think we're having for dessert? And we talk through it, probably a cake. Oh, that's good. Yep. So when the cake comes out, what are you going to do? And we talk about it. Like maybe if you stand back from the cake a little bit, maybe if pick something else to be doing on the other side of the table, you can help pass out the plates. I try to help them think of other strategies that don't involve sticking their finger in the cake.
Yep.
Another one that comes up a lot at birthdays while we're on the same topic is the idea of a piñata. So piñatas, like
We hate
again,
the piñatas.
as a group, we voted before the podcast. We do not like piñatas.
We hate them.
Yes. But my kids will get sad, if they don't break open the piñata, then they're super bummed about that. And so again, knowing your kid, you might have a kid that's like does not care and is not sad if they don't break the piñata because everyone gets candy. But I'm over here freaking out. I don't want someone to get hit in the face with a baseball bat. And my kid is like the one that wants to hit it as hard as he possibly can, like Hulk strength. And so if you know that that's going to be something that your child might struggle with, again, you're rehearsing it with them. You're talking it through. You're saying, hey, what could we do? I would really recommend that this is more of a dialogue. You don't want to lecture your kids. And obviously, the goal here isn't to be like, I'm going to tell you 10 instructions. It's more of like a brainstorm, right? So, hey, last time we were at the birthday, I know it was really hard for you. You didn't break open the piñata. What could we do this time? And talking through some of the options and that sort of thing can just be really helpful.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think the
And
key, oh, yeah.
oh yeah, no, go ahead.
I think the key here is just that we're practicing. We can anticipate where our kids might struggle and we're going to practice it in advance.
Yep. So that kind of brings us to something or another similar point. Point number 5 is evaluating together and problem solving together. And this is going to look a little bit different at different ages. So for younger kids, and we usually think about 6 or under probably for our kids with ADHD, it could be 7 or younger. Even thinking about how can we do that in the moment. So we were at a bounce house a couple weekends ago, and there were tons of kids everywhere. And one of mine just sort of ran up the ladder past another kid, right? Whereas there's a line, and we have to take turns. And that's in the moment. I might, not grab them, but pull them and say, hey, we have a line. We take turns when we're out in public, and giving them that prompt and that reminder to do that in the moment.
Mhm.
And that would be appropriate. Whereas with older kids, you obviously don't want to do that and make them feel embarrassed in front of their friends and things like that. So that might be an opportunity where afterwards, like Katie was saying, you process that with them and talk with them about it. Again, my oldest is like very sensitive to talking about those things and thinking about maybe doing kind of that positive negative feedback sandwich of like giving them some positive feedback on the things that went well and the things that you saw, and then talking about, hey, I noticed this situation come up, and problem solving and brainstorming with them. How could we handle that different next time, or helping them take on the perspective of that other child and think about how could this have impacted them, or what's something else I could have said instead of that to help
Mhm.
process that. And then again, following up with things that they did well.
I think that
Um,
this is where Katie would jump in, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, and tell us that declarative language would be a great tool to help your kid process through how things went. So rather
Yes.
than rather than giving them directives
mhm.
or asking too many questions, just making some open-ended statements, wondering statements about how they felt things went, what they could do differently next time, but again, in a very open-ended way. So feel free to jump in, Katie, but I had to say something because I feel like this is a great opportunity to do that.
Yes. I love that. I feel like you're totally listening to me when I talk about all this declarative language stuff. Yeah. And it is like, it's really powerful because, if when we are just giving our kids instructions and corrections, it can be like they start to kind of tune it out. And it also isn't building the skill, right? We might get them to comply in that moment, but they're not learning to think about it more independently. So when you use a declarative statement, and that's something like, oh, I wonder how that will make your friend feel if you stick your finger in the cake and lick it before she gets to blow out her candles. Or I wonder what would happen if, and again, you're saying this in a way, like you said, Mal, that allows them to come back with, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, here's my thoughts. And I think it's always really interesting to kind of get their perspective on things. Like, my daughter was at dance, and I think this is an example of an older kid, right? So she's almost 9, and she has a really good friend that she does dance class with. But her good friend has a few other friends in the class, and they all go to school together. And my daughter does not go to that school. So last week she came home and well, I actually picked her up from dance, and I saw when they were saying goodbye, the one friend was like giving everyone hugs, and my daughter wasn't kind of in that situation, I could see she was like really sad about it. And so again, that's an example where I didn't jump in and say like, "Oh, you can give your friend a hug" in the moment, because that would have really embarrassed her. So I waited until we got home, and then we sat down and, cut up an apple and had some apple snack and just talked about it. I was like, "What happened?" And she was able to explain like, "I feel left out," or "I don't really know those
Mhm.
girls as well." And again, like, of course, my husband is there, and he's like, social networking, like, you got to leverage her friends. Those are your relationships. And I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh. So, all right, let's back it down for just a second here. But we talked about this idea of like, what could you do? And she's like, I said, what if you asked them how their weekend was? And she's like, Mom, like, that would be so weird. It's a Thursday. I'm like, okay, don't ask them how their weekend was. So, but we kind of talked through it, and I didn't tell her what to say.
Mhm.
I gave some ideas, and then I said, I wonder what would happen if you said bye to them, or would it feel weird if you gave them a hug? And she was like, yeah, that would be weird. I don't want to give them a hug. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like, so it becomes more and more collaborative as kids get
Mhm.
older.
Yep.
I think that's
Mhm.
such an important point, Katie, is we really there it's so important that we get their side of the story
Mm-hmm.
and we value their input and perspective in these kind of situations, because that's really the most important. They're the ones that are in this friendship, not us, right?
Absolutely.
And
Um,
even thinking about like I see a lot of kids and a lot of families coming into my practice, and what one of their challenges is like not winning at something,
mhm,
and that being such a significant challenge in team sports and things like that, that they are so highly competitive, and it becomes, saying maybe mean things to other kids or having really huge emotional meltdowns and things like that. We think about, when we teach our kids academic skills, reading and writing and math, we know we have to instruct them over and over again, and they have to have practice, like
mhm,
Katie talked about before. But a lot of times we don't think about those. Those skills that we use in making friendships, or those executive functioning skills, and we have to teach them. And we really, really do. And we have to practice them. We can't expect our kids to go out there and be able to manage those emotions when they're feeling frustrated or upset or
mhm,
down. We have to create scenarios at home where we're playing games and setting situations up where they have to practice
mhm.
losing with us, and it's less high stakes.
Yep.
And they
Absolutely.
can and they can learn how to manage that in those situations. So we have to give them those opportunities to practice.
Mhm,
Absolutely. I love that. So, in summary, there, our fifth point is that we teach our kids to evaluate what has happened and to problem solve. And so, if they lost the game, it didn't go well, let's look at it. What could we do differently? How does that make you feel? How does that make them feel? And these types of things. And if you're looking for tips around executive functioning and emotion regulation, we actually have a free guide that we've created, and it's our 6 keys to raising a happy and independent child with ADHD. And we created that for you. We created that for parents who want so badly to support their kids, but need to start with this more basic understanding of like, what do I need to know about ADHD? So that's a really great starting off point. And that you can find the link in our show notes, which is under this episode.
yep, and I know that we said we'd give you 5 tips, but I wanna give you a bonus tip. So, the bonus tip here, and as Lori was kind of saying, like, we have to set our kids up in situations that are a little bit lower stakes, practicing things at home before they get out into the real world, the real soccer game, the stakes are high, everyone's watching, and kind of a nice transitional point perhaps is speaking with your child's school and seeing if they have any friendship, lunch bunch, social groups that your child could participate in, with kind of like-minded kids, kids that are working on the same skills, kids that they might um, connect with over the way their brain works and the way they see the world. So reaching out to your child's school, sometimes speech language pathologists run groups like this. Sometimes it's the school social worker or perhaps the psychologist. But reaching out to your child's school, see if there are any social options where they can group your child according to their interests, their strengths, what they're working on to make some of those connections. And again, that provides a space that's a little lower stakes as well, because there's a grown up there generally kind of facilitating, supporting those students. So that's something to look into if your school offers that.
Absolutely. So I want to just summarize today with our key takeaway, and that is that all of us want our kids to build friendships. And if you're starting to feel discouraged or you have those moments where you just start to question yourself, just take a minute and really remind yourself of all the positive traits that your child has, because so many kids with ADHD, they have a really strong desire to be social and to make friends, and that is beautiful. They're curious and witty and honest and adventurous, and these are all traits that make them an amazing kid and a wonderful friend as they learn some of these skills. And at the end of the day, they're going to probably need extra support as they're navigating the social world, but you are the best person to really help them. And as always, we're here to help you. Thanks for listening to Shining with ADHD by your hosts, Lori, Katie, and Mallory of the Childhood Collective.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and hit subscribe so you can be the first to know when a new episode airs.
If you are looking for links and resources mentioned in this episode, you can always find those in the show notes. See you next time.